Today, let's talk about 3 different story structures and how it relates to our first film. The first structure we're going to talk about is the classic 3-act structure. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. This is the structure that most writers know and many non-writers know. It's the one that you hear from all the great screenwriting books from the 90s, including the screenwriting gurus like Robert McKee. The simplest form that I've heard it stated is from Aaron Sorkin, who explains it thusly. Act 1, you chase your protagonist up a tree. Act 2, you throw rocks at him. Act 3, he gets down from the tree, or he doesn't. Again, the simplest form, but still true. It's also known as the setup, the journey, the resolution. Sometimes you might hear about other smaller plot points, such as the inciting incident, which is the event that sets the plot in motion, or the climax and the denouement of the film. I find this structure great for communicating with other filmmakers and storytellers, but not particularly helpful when it comes to sitting down and writing. You may have heard of the phrase, character is story and story is character, which refers to the mindset that your plot points should be connected to your character's wants and needs and the obstacles to those wants and needs. I personally find that working with just the 3-act story structure makes me think in terms of where to bring my characters rather than finding out where my characters want to go. But the good news is I find that the next story structure we're about to talk about does a lot better job of putting you in that character mindset. Dan Harmon's story circle is a bit more modern in terms of structure. He developed it in the late 1990s in order to codify structure in a way that distilled the Joseph Campbell monomyth, which I could talk about, but probably could do a whole episode on. It's often depicted with a circle drawing with a cut down the middle to separate 2 distinct areas, familiar and chaos, followed by the following steps along the perimeter. You, the character is in a zone of comfort or familiarity. Need, they desire something. Go, they enter an unfamiliar situation. Search, they adapt to that situation. Find, they get that which they wanted. Take, they pay a heavy price for it. Return, they return to the familiar situation. Change, they have changed as a result of the journey. And then you get a sequel. I like this structure a lot more than the 3-act structure because you'll notice it's pretty much entirely focused on the character's experience and perspective rather than the audience's perspective. But if you want to get even more granular, you can take a look at the next structure. Save the cat. Our final structure of the day is one of the more modern interpretations based on decades of screenwriting rather than centuries of storytelling. Blake Snyder was one of the most successful spec script writers in Hollywood, and in 2015 he published Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need, which quickly became the go-to structure for a lot of Hollywood executives. It does get a bad rap because of how rigid the structure is and could lend itself towards creating something rather formulaic. While the first 2 structures that we mentioned have about 3 to 8 beats, Save the Cat features 15 and several other smaller structural points mentioned within the book. But they include the opening image, theme stated, setup, catalyst, debate, break into 2, B story, fun and games, midpoint, bad guys close in, all is lost, dark night of the soul, break into 3, finale, and final image. I could speak about each one of these different points in depth, but I want to highlight the titular point that wasn't mentioned in the previous list. While not a part of the larger beat sheet that Blake Snyder provides to the reader, it is an interesting point to mention that it is often missing in a lot of Hollywood films. In the simplest terms, it's the moment in the film when the audience is shown the hero of the film is not only somebody who's different from everybody else in the world, but is somebody who is, and this is important, worth rooting for. A good example would be the beginning of Aladdin. When we are introduced to the main character, what are some of the things that we learn immediately about him? He's a thief, he's poor, he's kind of funny, and he's athletic. And while we can generally assume that this is a Disney film and this is the title character, and if he's on screen, that probably means that he's the hero, so he's probably worth rooting for, he does something that endears us to him. After an entire song devoted to him stealing a piece of bread, what does he do with it? He gives it to children. In 2012, Andrew Stanton of Pixar fame gave a TED Talk entitled The Clues to a Great Story, where he discussed Pixar's devotion to story over everything else. One of those clues was answering the question, why should I care? In Finding Nemo, Marlon's family is devastated by an outside force, so he wants to protect his son. In Up, Carl's wife passes away, so he wants to honor her memory. I'm not saying the entire Save the Cat structure should be followed to a T, but I do think it's worth understanding and studying to at least have it as a tool. And the interesting part about all three of these structures that we've talked about today is that they could actually overlap one another. If you'd like me to talk more about story structures, either more in depth about these or different story structures, comment below and let me know. So the first film that we're going to be doing is entitled Play Along. It's a short comedy about two people in a bar. Should be fairly simple to put together. They're in the bar discussing everything from blind dates to one of them has a stalker. Should be funny, should be interesting. It's really important to me that my short films are just that, they're short films. They're not tone poems, they're not concept pieces, they're not, the first act teasing the rest of a larger feature film. My favorite short films are a complete story from start to finish. So these story beats that we talked about today, while they might, for a feature film, be whole scenes that are minutes long, for a short film, they might more be moments that are seconds long. Once again, if you'd like to read the script for Play Along and give feedback, I posted it for the Patreon crowd at the link below if you'd like to join us. I'm also going to include some beat sheets that relate the Play Along script to each of the structures that we talked about today. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and I've also started a new podcast with my best friend from college, Joe Galizia. It's called the Cinematic Explorers Club Podcast, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.